Okay, so 8.2, we are going to continue on with trig basics and talk about how we find missing angles. So we already covered finding trig ratios and finding missing sides. Now we're going to talk about finding missing angles. So in order to find a missing angle, we're going to use what's called an inverse trig ratio. So if we know the sine, cosine, or tangent of an angle, you can use the inverse trig function to find that missing angle. So on your calculator, if you look directly above those buttons that we were using in class the day before, the sine, cosine, and tangent, you should see what looks like these. Sine with a -1, cosine -1, and that is the inverse of sine. So a regular trig function, like what we talked about yesterday, was that, or in 8.1, whenever you're watching this, was that my input is an angle, right? So I'm going to do like sine of 65, right? And the output is a ratio. And so if I do sine of 65, I get 0.906. And it keeps going, but for now, that's good. Okay, so when we look at the inverse of that, we're going to switch the input and the output. So now we're inputting the ratio, right? So now it's saying if I know that the sine is 5/7, I can input that ratio and it's going to output the angle. So what it would look like is I would take the inverse sine of 5/7. Make sure you're plugging these things in, right? And you're getting it an angle. So I would get 45.6 degrees. Okay, so using the regular trig function is when we're looking for sides, and an inverse trig function is when we're looking for angles. All right, so we're going to start by labeling like we did before. So we're labeling our theta, our hypotenuse, our opposite, and our adjacent. Okay, so there's an x here because that's our unknown, but that's the angle that we want. So we're still going to label that our theta. Opposite, right? Here's our right angle. Opposite that is our hypotenuse. And then the last one is the adjacent. So like we talked in class yesterday, we're kind of finding these pairs. So that's a pair, that's a pair, that's a pair. A is what we do not need, right? There's nothing there that correlates to A. So then if we go back to our SOHCAHTOA, I have O and H. And so I want to use sine, right, which is O and H, to find my angle. So remember we said the setup is always going to be sine of theta equals O over H. Okay, that hasn't changed. The difference is now I don't know my theta, so I'm going to put sine of x, and then O is 15, H is 24. Okay, now in order to find this x value, I have to take the inverse of this. So I'm going to take the inverse sine of my ratio, and it's going to give me my x. Okay, so like we said before, anytime you're looking for an angle, you're going to use this inverse sine. So now let's look over here at if I were to plug this into my calculator. Here's what I need to do. I hit the second button. It is the top left corner. And then I hit the sine button, which we already found. And then I just hit 15 divided by 24. You can close the parenthesis or not. This one, it doesn't matter. And then hit enter. It should look like this on your screen. So you're going to see, just like I wrote down here, sine with the little -1. Again, that means inverse of 15 divided by 24 because that's the ratio that we're inputting and it's outputting this answer, which is our angle. Now it says round to the nearest degree. So I'm going to look at this 0.6 and I'm going to round that because it's a 6. I'm going to round it up. So x is about 39 degrees. double check that when you do this on your calculator, you get that answer. And if not, we might have to switch the mode again. Degrees. Okay, let's try one more. So again, we're going to start by labeling theta, hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent. So here's my theta. Opposite of that, here's my right angle. Opposite of that is my hypotenuse. Last is my adjacent side. So 11 and h go together, theta and x go together, 8 and a go together, and that o is no longer needed. Okay, so if I go to SOHCAHTOA, I told you this wasn't going away. I need a and h. So a and h are here. That means I'm going to use ca, which is cosine of theta, is a over h. So again, this cosine setup initially will always look the same. We just fill in what we know and what's missing. So theta is my unknown, so that's x. A is 8, h is 11. Again, when I see this here, that should tell me that I need to use the inverse of 8/11 to get me x. Okay, so again, when I plug this into my calculator, I'm going to hit second cosine 8 divided by 11, enter. And you should get 43.3, which again, if we're rounding to the nearest degree, 3 is going to round down, so that would be 43 degrees. Okay, so that is it for finding angles. A little bit shorter today. We're going to spend some time reviewing this and putting it all together. So finding trig ratios, finding missing sides, and finding missing angles.